Tim Kirby Russia hot takes. The real threat to our global safety is a dirty bomb, and not the Kremlin's massive nuclear arsenal. Now, that may sound awfully biased coming from someone within Russia, and it is, but I would also say that Washington's massive nuclear arsenal isn't really part of the problem either. Let me explain. Recently, the mainstream media has been telling the world that Putin has been threatening to nuke the West if this, that, and the other doesn't happen, and that's not the case. He's just been reminding the West that there's this thing called mutually assured destruction. That policy of having a balance between the great nuclear powers is what kept us alive through the Cold War, and we want to stay alive, don't we? And if we remember history, when the Soviet Union fought Finland, the Soviet Union actually looked very weak and inefficient, and it sort of gave a PR signal to Berlin that these guys are suckers, you're going to roll them, why don't you just invade the Soviet Union and take the living space that you need? And guess what? Both Russia and Germany paid for that greatly. So I think Putin knows in his mind that he needs to remind the West that just because the special military operation was, especially in the first half a year, fought specifically with the objective to only destroy military targets, keep the civilian population safe, not really touch their infrastructure. He wanted to remind them that it would be very easy to destroy or melt all said civilians and infrastructure if he wanted to. I think he's doing this to avoid this sort of consequence of the Soviet-Finnish conflict. You know, ultimately, so that way history doesn't repeat itself, especially the history of World War II. Now, one thing that could potentially be a real threat to starting a nuclear war would be if Ukraine were to join NATO, because that would basically put NATO de facto into a war against Russia that's already started, and, well, that war would become quickly a total war, a total nuclear war. However, thankfully for us who want to live to see our old age and see our grandchildren be born and grow up and all that stuff, that's not going to happen because NATO told Zelensky no, and even Sleepy Joe told him no. Now, if you're sitting in Washington, you know that Ukraine can't join NATO or it's a nuclear war, and you can't launch nukes against Russia or the world ends. But what if a third party uses a dirty bomb? That just means that all that Russia could do, in a legalistic sort of sense, remember, Putin's background has a lot of law in it, he likes his rules, that would essentially mean that Russia would only really be authorized to retaliate against Kiev. And we also can't remember that, I think, despite the fact that the propaganda machine says otherwise, the real people who know in Washington, the Kissinger-type people, they know that Ukrainians are just sort of like Russians from the South. And if they use a dirty bomb to destroy people in the Donbass and Russia were to massively retaliate, it may not give them the dream of the regime change in Moscow that they were looking for, but it certainly kills a lot of Russians. And as Lloyd Austin and other U.S. officials have stated, that's the real goal, to drain Russia, and hopefully drain Russia of man and resource to create some sort of regime change. So I'm very scared because this dirty bomb strategy would allow there to be this sort of kind of preemptive nuclear strike that would be very safe for the West and accomplish a lot of their goals. So, guys, I think the number one issue, if I were sitting in the Kremlin, would be to make sure that there is no means or no dirty bomb being produced by Kiev, because that would be the ideal situation. They could use 1 or 2 or 3. Russia retaliates. Everyone in that giant region of the world, maybe a 500-kilometer radius. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. Please forgive me. I'm not a physicist. But maybe a 500-kilometer radius of traditional Russian territory becomes a nuclear hellhole that's unpopulated by anyone. And that's definitely a win for the Brzezinski, Kissinger, Rand project for a new American century type of people. Yep, this is a depressing one. So anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video and you like the opinions coming out of my big fat mouth, then join up on my Telegram channel. That's Tim Kirby Hardcore on Telegram. Link, of course, in the description.